life passes without action, which does not leave a good or bad impression on the ego. Every single action we do has a consequence for our ego. That's a good consequence or a bad consequence. It's up to us. So sometimes the question is not actually the action that we're doing, but the motivation behind it and our intention. And if our intentions are good, inshallah, our actions will be good too. So all of our aims of worship and all of our actions, our aim should be to get closer to Allah SWT. And we know that in Surah Taha, verse 14, Allah SWT tells us, establish prayers for my remembrance. So of course, we know with our various acts of ibadah, including salah, it's there to remind us of Allah SWT and build our connection with Him. And Hassan al-Basri said something really amazing about this. He said, Iman or faith is not outer decoration nor mere hope. Rather, it is what settles in the heart and what is affirmed by actions. So everything that we feel in our heart is all very well feeling that, but if it's not affirmed, if it's not confirmed, if it's not kind of seen in our actions, then reality is all just talk. It's like when you say to your parents, oh, mum, dad, I love you, but you don't show them that, you're disobedient to them, or you don't, you don't care for them, then what is the value in those words? So our words and our actions go hand in hand, and that's what Tazkiya is, and that's kind of the two stages that I see it in.
That's really, really informative, and I like the idea of looking at the words that we use every day. I'm sorry is another one. Sometimes we say it and there's no meaning attached to it, and I think sometimes we see this as well, unfortunately, in our ibadah, sometimes in our salah. Maybe we're doing the actions, maybe we're saying the words, but is the heart really connected to it? So it's kind of, both ways, isn't it? Connecting the heart to the actions and the actions to the heart, inshallah. So Hassan has really raised some good points about that. Have you got anything to add to the different aspects of Tazkiya?
Yes, subhanAllah. And it's interesting because as you're speaking, you're making me think, these days what happens is when we're having a conversation with our loved ones, our mind is always looking at our phone or thinking about our phone. So if it
goes back to Hassan's news story, doesn't it?
Exactly. And if you think about that, so when you're in your salah, what are you actually doing? Have you actually focused and got proper khushu in your salah? And I mean, many of us are students of knowledge, or we're on the journey of trying to understand Islam more, and a lot of scholars and teachers who we all respect, so they say to you, if you actually want to become more active and become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the first thing you do is you improve your prayer. But how many of us have actually done that?
It's true. It's so true.
And I mean, I suppose the other things really is that I think it's really important for us to remember the question that Allah asks us in the Quran. Allah, I think it's 9 times, or at least 9 times, Allah says, where are you going? And it comes back to the analogy of a journey, because every day we should be improving. And we were speaking about this before, but I don't know if you saw Matthew McConaughey's Oscar acceptance speech. In it, the first thing he said was he thanked God. So this is a non-Muslim thanking God. And then he gave appreciation for the people that are around him, his family. And then he said, who is he competing with? Or because someone asked him that when he was 15, and he said, actually, I don't know the answer to the question. So they came back to him 2 weeks later and asked the same thing, and he said, I'm competing with the best version of myself in 10 years. So they asked him the question again at the age of 25 and said, okay, so now I'm competing with the version of me when I'm 35. So continually kind of trying to be the best possible version of you, so that you can see where your journey is taking you. Because at the end of the day, the reason we're Muslim is because we all want to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we all want to go to Jannah, and that's why we're working so hard. So make all of the things that you're doing work for you.
That's actually a really good point about competing with the best version of yourself in the future. And I always think of this around Ramadan, actually, and think, where was I at last Ramadan, and how have I improved? And, it's nice to have that kind of yearly event to sort of take stock and self-evaluate, which sometimes we don't do.
Absolutely. And I actually think that obviously we don't know, but I think it's one of the wisdoms of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in creating Ramadan for us, and actually reminding us that we need to take stock in review, because all of the things that Sister Hassana spoke about are really, really important. But the most important thing, in my opinion, is that reflection and that review, and understanding what's your starting point. Because if you know what that is, you can start planning your journey.
Absolutely.
If you know you're in London and you want to go to Mecca, you can do that. If you don't know where you are, how do you get to Mecca?
It's true. No, it's absolutely true. And also the point about the, the salah. When your salah is sound, obviously we know all our other actions are sound as well. And this is something so simple that all of us can do. We don't have to go to a course. We don't have to spend any money. It's, it's something that we do at home you know, 5 times a day. So we can all invest in making this better. But, you know, subhanAllah, I know this is something that I struggle with. This is my, you know, sort of personal struggle. So inshallah, I'm hoping some of these, but I'm hoping some of these tips are going to help me to improve on that, inshallah. You know, I think some people with this concept of tazkiyah, some people tend to think that it's something very difficult, you know, that it's something very unattainable. But is that really the case? Is it something, you know, is it something very difficult?
I think, of course, when we're talking about developing yourself, it is difficult. You know, in any case, I think you know, for human beings to analyze themselves, to criticize themselves, that's a very difficult process for you know, in and of itself. But in reality, tazkiyah is actually quite simple. If you just break it down into those 2 steps, and you're doing it on a day-to-day basis, that's the important thing, then inshallah it should be very, very easy. So what I would recommend, and this is something my sheikh taught me, is that Fajr time you should have a reflection of yourself. What do I want to achieve today? What am I going to do today? And then, you know, after Isha, after you've prayed and it's the end of the day, then look back at your day. What have I achieved today? Have I done all the things that I wanted to do in a productive way? Have I done more good deeds or more bad deeds? And if you're doing that on a day-to-day basis, you're holding yourself to account. But in reality, that's not good enough. You then have to look at that, you know, that account of the day and use that to then make the next day better. And if you're not doing that, then it's just a kind of stagnant process. It's all about kind of taking that next step. And like Sister Adama said, it, you know, it ties in with ihsan. All of these Islamic concepts are tied in with one another. If you're doing tazkiyah in the right way, it will eventually lead to ihsan, which is one of the things that is actually, you know, it's you know, almost like fard upon us, and we don't sometimes realize it. But striving for excellence is so important. It's almost as important as our salah. Subhanallah.
And it's interesting because those 2 things that you've said, they are actually positive psychology interventions, you know, and so they improve your well-being. And actually, it's like Islam is telling us to do these things. If we follow the Sunnah and we apply what the Quran tells us, we're not just improving our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're actually improving our well-being on a day-to-day basis.
No, certainly, you know, an interesting concept. And I think, as with all of these concepts, we, you know, alhamdulillah, we're so fortunate to have so many, you know, wonderful examples that we can, you know, emulate to and aspire to, you know, within the female Sahaba. Adama, can you think of any examples of these that you can share with us?
So many different examples. I mean, because essentially being the best and trying to purify yourself was essentially the aim of the people of the past. I mean, normally we're fixated with how many sunnah prayers we can do or how many fasts we can do, but for them it was more the quality of their actions. There's one particular example that I can give. It's not a female Sahaba, but it's Ali radiallahu anhu. And there was a particular example that happened with him when he was actually engaged in a battle with an opponent of him, and he managed to overpower him. And basically the guy was in such a desperation, he actually spat at him. And Ali was so enraged, but then he kind of just left him. And then the guy was like, oh, Amirul Mu'min, what is this? After I had insulted you by spitting in your face, you could have taken advantage of me immediately. You had me at your mercy and completely subdued and subjugated. What is it that stopped you from hurting me? And he said, I had the intention of hurting you solely for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But by having you spit in my face, you stirred up my anger. So if I had actually taken advantage of you then, it wouldn't have been for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so what this story kind of indicates is the importance of sincerity. And there's actually a book that I was reading about the purification of the soul. And that's actually the first chapter, that the foundation of everything that we do is our ikhlas. And if we don't have that foundation, and if it's not strong, then trying to purify ourselves in every other respect doesn't mean anything, and it's meaningless. So it is about trying to establish sincerity in everything that we do. And we find this even with the 5 pillars of Islam. We're talking about whether tazkiyah is something that's very complex. It's actually something we find embedded in the 5 pillars of the deen. With the shahada, it's a cleansing process. You know how you fertilize the soil? Before you grow anything there, that is tazkiyah in a sense. You're purifying something to establish something. And this is something that we can find within the base action of what we do in Islam, so it's really important. Absolutely.
With Jazakallah khair, great, you know, great example there. And as you said, there's so many, you know, so many examples throughout the life of the Prophet and the companions that can give these fantastic examples and actually show us ways to live this life and make these changes. And we forget sometimes that they were living in sincere, in the most adverse conditions. You know, sometimes we forget how easy we have it now, don't we? Subhanallah. But Saeed, I wanted to come back to you. So what is the best place to start for one who wishes to start this process of Tazkiya?
Brilliant question. And I would say the first thing to do really is just kind of like assess where you are, because if you know where you are, you know, you can kind of work out where you want to go. And it's not a big thing. Just reflect for a couple of seconds, you know, for example, what is the condition of your salah? You know, many of us in the approach to Ramadan will be thinking about either making up our fast or kind of doing some to prepare. You know, as you said, what was the condition of your Ramadan last year, so that you kind of, you know what your starting point is, and then just think about where you want to get to. And, you know, again, coming back to the intention, if you have the right intention, I think too many of us, you know, we're focused on doing the Islam and not the ihsan. So if you can shift yourself to there and don't make it into something too big. So my biggest advice really is just small steps, because if you try and do everything in one go, you'll get overwhelmed and you won't actually make it, which is why I think what happens, again, I mean, look at Ramadan, for example, you know, we've got the first 10 days to kind of maybe get our body adjusted, the middle 10 days to really solidify it, and the last 10, all of a sudden we have the boost of the benefit of the last 10 days to keep us going. Try and think, you know, take any month that you have. They say it takes 21 days to form a habit. And I actually would like to think that habits require a lot of effort and energy. But let's focus on practices, because if you're practicing something, all of a sudden it's within your life. So, for example, you know, we're breathing, and we're breathing without any effort because it's ingrained within our body, within our mind. We know how to do it. Any changes that you want to make, just focus on them and actually turn them into practices in your life. And simply with salah, I would say, you know, one way is, rather than try and do your wudu in 30 seconds, why don't you just take a little bit more time and realise that every drop of water that falls off your elbow is sins dropping off. And when you remember things like that, you kind of think, actually, maybe I'll take as long in my wudu.
Absolutely.
You know, but be practical about it, obviously. But small steps.
Absolutely.
You know.
Jazakallah khair for that. That's a really great comment. Hassana, just very quickly from you, just a final comment. I think, you know, sometimes we're also busy, you know, we're mums or we're working. You know, what tips can you give people that are kind of struggling to find the time to do the basics to actually achieve this?
It's a very good question. I'm going to turn to Ustad Khurram Murad, who's written a lot about this. He says, unless you approach Tazkiya as an all-embracing process, you will find that your life is compartmentalized, certain parts impeding the development of others. This can only result in a life of disharmony and unhappiness. Approached as a comprehensive and all-embracing process, however, you will find that each part of your life will complement some other part. This should, God willing, make your struggle on the path to God and Jannah easier and full of grace. So subhanAllah, remember, Tazkiya is a journey and it's going to be difficult, but inshallah, bear that in mind and your life will be in harmony, inshallah. So a lot to look forward to, alhamdulillah.
Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah for all your comments, but what a lovely thought to end the discussion on there. The purification of the soul is a must for the believer if he wishes to be accepted by Allah. It is the foundation of success and the pathway to eternal bliss. In no place in the Quran does Allah swear more than He does in respect to the purification of the soul. In Surah Shams, Allah swears. He swears by the sun and its brightness, by the moon and when it follows it, by the day when it brightens it, and by the night when it covers it, and by the heavens and its maker, and by the earth and its expansionist, and by the soul and Him who perfected it, then inspired its piety and undoubtedly attained its goal to who cleansed it, and he failed to who covered it in sin. What a fantastic surah to end on. Just a quick reminder of this week's competition question.
This week on Women's AM, we are holding an exciting competition for you sisters out there.